Oh, seems like a pretty nice normal day in Shadow Moses. Are we gonna do that again? Or no. This video will spoil all of Metal Gear. This is your warning. Alright, goodbye. And hello. Metal Gear has always towed this strange line between ultra-serious war drama where its characters have to deal with nuclear threats and reflections about their inner wants and desires, balanced by the goofy stuff, like the guy who has the poops real bad, and a running gag of people peeing themselves the moment things get a bit heavy. But amidst all that, Metal Gear is not afraid to get a little spooky sometimes. It's not a series that shies away from making things feel a little tense and weird. It does this most notably by breaking the fourth wall in sudden and unashamed ways. I've always found that moment in MGS1 right after the first sniper wolf fight slightly unnerving, when Mei Ling asks you if you'd like to save your data because she feels like something bad is about to happen, and if you can't spam circle fast enough, she's proven correct and you'd need to return to when you last saved, as opposed to continuing like normal. There's also that moment in MGS2 when you reach Arsenal Gear and the colonel we've depended on all game to give us directions starts talking about shutting the game down and pruning certain kinds of weeds.
Don't you have anything else to do with your time?
Metal Gear's meta nature is really fun in that regard, and there aren't many other series out there that are willing to have so much fun in a setting that, on paper, really would not call for it. But the vague spookiness of Metal Gear doesn't just come from the moments when it acknowledges your existence. It's baked into the very nature of these games. All stealth games come with a certain level of tension in that sense. Tension is part of the experience's bones, and every Metal Gear game understands this, but not without there being those fun, little, silly moments too. But, I'm not talking about any of that stuff when I say that there's an underlying spookiness to Metal Gear. I'm talking about something a little more tangible. Metal Gear, literally, factually, definitely has ghosts.
Suddenly, there was intense light all around me, and when I came to, I was home.
Before anyone gets me, I know that that's about aliens, not ghosts. Alright, I know who I'm dealing with. For those unaware, yes, Metal Gear does indeed have ghosts. This series has often dabbled with the paranormal, with characters like Psycho Mantis being the most famous, but what some people may not know is that Metal Gear has a lot more than just him when it comes to paranormal spoopies. A lot more. There are dozens of polters that geist the halls of Shadow Moses, 42 ghosts to be exact, and they can be found by whipping out your fancy state-of-the-art digital Sony camera and snapping a photo at very specific places. Some are a little hidden, and others are in more obvious places that you may find just when randomly taking some photos, usually of places that you really vibe with, like the front of the tank hangar, just next to the heliport, arguably the most iconic location in MGS1. It gives me all sorts of goosebumps when I see it on a fresh playthrough. The way the snow falls, the footprints Snake makes in the snow, and all the little nooks you can explore really make this area feel like a tangible place, which is carefully balanced by that feeling of the tension as the spotlights crisscross over the helipad and the guard on the right looks out for the aforementioned footprints in the snow. MGS1 has an aesthetic that no other game in the series really matches, mostly due to the design intents and it being a PS1 title, which make it stand the test of time more so than almost any other game in the series when you think about it. Sincerely, immaculate vibes. And this area is a classic example of how good MGS1 is at making its environments feel inviting to explore, but eager to temper that desire in case you get spotted and immediately stressed out from having to find somewhere to hide. Guards patrolling a heavily fortified nuclear disposal facility have a way of killing the mood, it turns out. Don't worry though, because we've got that cool picture we took earlier to remind us of a calmer time. And whoop! Well, that wasn't there before. Ghosts do not appear in the photographs until you head over to the main menu, extras, and load up the pictures you've taken in the album screen. And you normally get a decent bit of control over the mood of these photos by tinkering with the color values. But you take a picture with a ghost in it, and you've got a pretty distracting guest photobombing your holiday shots. In actuality, these ghosts are the development team taking fun and wacky photos. And it's always nice to see this kind of thing in these games. Development is a long, complicated complicated process, so it's nice to see some of the staff having fun and immortalizing themselves in a really cool way. Of course, if you really do not want a ghost in your photo, you have an option to get rid of them. I unfortunately knew about the ghosts before I happened to snap any of them accidentally on my own, but I have to imagine that this was a pretty unnerving discovery that someone had one night at 3 AM during a late night My Metal Gear is Solid session. If you have any ghost stories of your own, feel free to share with the class. The nature of this mechanic also has grounds in history too. Not because ghosts are actually real though, right? Spirit photography is a genuine practice that involves capturing images of ghosts on camera. Ever since the late 19th century, there have been people trying to use photography to catch a glimpse of the paranormal, to capture something that our waking eyes can't perceive, to find something that confirms a life after death. Long exposure times of the cameras in the era meant that any movement that disturbed the subject of the image would cause artifacts to appear or the wispy remnants of a person moving around the area, creating after images where a transparent figure makes itself known, or amorphous shapes dancing around in an unseen world. That's essentially all the explanation you need to know that this is a practice based in fiction, but the evidence varies and it's undeniable that certain photos are peculiar enough to make me question things. Images that contain a person composed of vapor and light shafts, or ominous faces in the backgrounds of smoke and mirrors certainly make the argument that we really can capture ghosts on camera, right? Of course, the most famous examples of this stuff in history were proven or confessed to be fake at one point or another, with some spirit photographers using mannequins to simulate a ghostly apparition or modifying a camera to insert a pre-exposed image just as the photo was taken. But the want to believe can sometimes defy the reality of evidence, and as the years have gone on, spirit photography has remained pretty popular as an art form. In the times before high-definition cameras, it would be fairly easy to say that a bit of blurry dust on a lens was some kind of spiritual apparition in disguise. Grainy footage with dozens of tiny little artifacts could, with the right context, be explained as some kind of ghost. And sometimes there are, again, pretty convincing examples of this stuff. Nothing that would outright confirm that spirits really do exist in this form, but enough to sometimes make the idea percolate in my brain just that little bit. The pareidolia phenomenon is something that intersects with spirit photography often as well. This is when you see a face in a cloud, or notice that the coat slumped over your chair just on your right might be a person for just a brief second. Take a look around you right now and try to think about what you're seeing. Look out from the corner of your eye and try to make sense of what you envision. It's your brain taking in information and trying to form some kind of meaning from it. A subconscious desire to form something fantastical from the reality of boring rules and strict concepts. Spirit photography is another thing that some of us so desperately want to believe in, to the point that we'll willingly believe the lie as long as it makes our lives just that little bit more interesting. But the reality is that sometimes we need fiction to ground us here on the bottom floor, until maybe it's our time to truly see if there is something afterward. Ghosts make a return in Metal Gear Solid 2, though taking on a much smaller role than they did in MGS1. In fact, in the standard version of MGS2, there is only one ghost to find in the entire game. That ghost being Hideo Kojima's on the second screen of Hole 2 in the tanker. Kojima is due to release a big budget film soon, isn't he? Well, whenever it releases, it won't be his first time on the big screen, clearly. The other time you'll find a ghost is inside MGS2's VR missions included with Substance. First in Raiden's 5th photography mission, where he has to take a picture of a ghost wandering the deck of the tanker. Nothing particularly stands out about this one though, and at a first glance, it's easy to assume there's nothing there, until you realize that one guard isn't being picked up on the Solton radar, but in every other sense of the word, seems like a real person, until you walk right through him, that is. Our second ghost is a lot more expected, and is found in the next photography mission. Raiden has to take a picture of a ghost that hates light, and considering it's found in one of the spookier areas of the game, we can assume that darkness will be the key. We find this body, shoot the light bulb above it, and our ghost will appear right in front of us, in what is a very typically ghostly fashion, I have to say. Not that there's anything wrong with that, it's just that I expected some kind of twist. Maybe a name badge with the developer's name on it or something. This one is fun to mess around with though, since the light on the USP causes the ghost to hover away and come back, which is a lot of fun to play around with. From there, let's move on to Metal Gear Solid MGS4 Guns of the Patriots. A game that deals heavily with the ghosts of the past. Nostalgia is a potent weapon for any piece of media to use, but MGS4 uses it constantly to cause great pain to Snake and a fair bit to the player when they realize that MGS1 will soon be 30 years old. And we can't have a game like this, which brings us back to the halls of Shadow Moses without featuring some friendly ghosts to find. Just like before, Snake can find a bunch of ghosts here that are actually developers having a little bit of fun. But you can also find the ghosts of some of MGS1's cast in iconic locations, like the vent where you have your first call with Master Liquid Miller Snake. And there's something cool to how MGS4 plays with the idea of memories and echoes of the past and uses this ghost Easter egg to hammer those ideas home even more. Searching for ghosts outside can actually be pretty tricky since they're placed in some pretty vague spots sometimes, like Yoji Shinkawa, who's just hanging around outside the South Communications Tower. And because of how their pale blue visage often blends into the scenery, it can be hard to notice a ghost if you aren't paying attention. Luckily, there's a mechanic specific to MGS4 that can help us track ghosts a little easier. The Sorrow's doll lets us commune with the dead, and while that normally means we get to shake a person's corpse to see what goodies fall out like a meaty piñata, for Shadow Moses that means keeping their image persistently shown on the camera without having to waste the film on capturing a photo. Doing this shows the ghosts as these persistent floating images that slowly jitter around the place, subtly phasing in and out. And when combined with the moody ambience of Shadow Moses, it makes for some really cool moments. Again, this is one of those things that I bet would have been really neat to stumble upon randomly when playing the game one night. I can imagine it spooking someone pretty good if they weren't expecting it at all. Seeing the ghost of Sniper Wolf silently wave in the wind of the snowfield is also a pretty melancholic feeling. You can't help but think back to her death in MGS1, and when you snap back here to see her spirit stuck all these years later, it's a pretty sad sight. She's still lingering around here in this quiet, empty field, but at least she still has her wolves. This method is a great excuse for looking all over Shadow Moses too, provided you clear some space first. Searching around Shadow Moses like this is actually one of the rare times I wandered through these areas really slowly, and it's an amazing thing to be able to check out this location in such a different way. MGS4 is a visual treat when you get down in the dirt and really focus in on what's around you. This whole exercise has made me want to take things a little slower in games, actually, to see everything that I possibly can in the short amount of time that I have left. The ghosts can be seen as a simple Easter egg to reference the very same thing that was featured in MGS1, but if we were to think about it just a little bit more, it's pretty clear how their inclusion affects the greater experience. It all speaks to how painful nostalgia can be sometimes, with the echoes of the past still lingering here all these years later. Shadow Moses is stuck in a form of stasis just like the spirits, and nothing can truly be done to set any of them free. There's also Japanese folklore to consider as well. Yurei are what the West would refer to as ghosts. Spirits are held in reverence in Japanese culture, and if a person is murdered and the rites to carry their soul to their ancestors have not been performed, their spirit is doomed to turn into a yurei, something that bridges the gap between the waking world and the spirit one. Almost all of the former Foxhound members we see lingering in these halls fulfill a similar sort of role. One that hits a little harder when we look back to a character encountered by Big Boss. In Metal Gear Solid 3, there is a little-known character called the Sorrow. The Sorrow was the boss's true love, and in 1962, the Sorrow had defected back to the Soviet Union, which then eventually led to the boss having to kill him herself. We can see the long-aged aftermath of this via his corpse right after the boss lobs Snake off a bridge for not wearing appropriate workplace attire. Then the first time we actually see the Sorrow alive, kinda, but not really, is when the boss defects herself, and it's here we see his ghostly image appear right next to her and then swiftly disappear. And for the entire rest of the game, he is nowhere to be seen. That is, right up until Snake gets captured, where we get to see his first ever interaction with the Sorrow in an R1 prompt where he gives Snake the code to escape his cell. This is a very very interesting thing to think about for a second, because when we think about how ghosts have been handled in Metal Gear so far, almost every interaction with them is a fairly nice passive one. They are never considered an enemy and almost always are a nice bonus to interact with, which puts the Sorrow in this interesting spot too, because he never directly antagonizes Big Boss, even though he is set up to be an enemy, kind of. Of course, there is his boss battle, where you walk along the River of the Dead and see all the soldiers you've killed, and while there's some fucking funny ones to see every now and then, the river's purpose is to make you face the grim reality of death. That your direct actions have caused the unending suffering of all these souls now lost to time, stuck endlessly wandering down this path, and the only way out of this yourself is to die, and use the revival pill to bring yourself back from the brink. But the Sorrow doesn't try to actively kill Big Boss in this situation. He more so wants both Snake and the player to understand the heavy price that death has, and the permanent marks it leaves even on a world they have no waking knowledge of. It's essentially a lesson, a really immersive, frankly dangerous lesson, and I don't think the Sorrow should ever teach again. I'm already bad enough at math without some guy hurling necromantic energy balls at my face. Mortality and the price of killing is something that Metal Gear has tried to make a succinct point about ever since the series started, really. Because contrary to what many people for some reason truly believe, these games are political and are at their core, despite how cool the mechs are, extremely anti-war. Solid Snake's only pathway through MGS-1 is over the bodies of all the Genome soldiers he kills, and that is used by Liquid to maybe make Snake think that he enjoys the act of murder. We then get an option to use a tranquilizer gun in nearly every Metal Gear after this, to the point that it becomes a stable part of our equipment in these games, which makes me assume that Solid Snake probably had an epiphany over how he conducts missions. Just forget about Arsenal Gear, where Snake rampages through the place with an infinite ammo M4 for a second. Killing clearly has an effect on Solid Snake as a character, where if you kill more than 50 people in a single area in MGS4, Liquid's haunting accusation rings in Snake's ears, causing him to be a little sicky.
You enjoy all the killing, that's why. Charge!
Of course, that's Solid Snake, and we're talking about Big Boss here. So does Big Boss feel at all the same about killing? Does this experience maybe rethink his position on it? I guess not. The Sorrow's role in MGS3 is, oddly enough, one that really tries to support Big Boss in ways that no one will ever know, either by giving him the code to escape, reminders of the bomb timers that Big Boss places in the Shagohod's facility, or signs of encouragement after defeating Volgin and the boss. He's a ghost like others encountered in the series, but one that directly tries to help as much as he reasonably can, perhaps fulfilling some guiding role, much like the parental figure that the boss was to Big Boss.
Take me to heaven, Snake.
Peace Walker has ghosts in a couple of senses too. The first is the idea of the ghost in the machine that lies within Peace Walker itself, though the interview tapes kind of disparage this idea. The boss's AI was simply an incredibly good recreation of the boss's will and ideas, and not much a literal ghost in the machine as we may have first expected. Though saying all that, I do enjoy the idea of this whole thing being a little vague. Maybe the boss's soul really did come through the AI in the moment it decided to drown itself in order to stop a nuclear war. This is something that I wish Peace Walker left more open to interpretation, which to be fair is the case if you don't listen to Strangelove's interview tape that undoes this whole train of thought. So, the moral of the story, don't ask questions, always assume you're right. Thankfully, the other ghosts in this game are a lot simpler because they are literally just ghosts. We have the classic side op where we need to just picture a ghost, but there's another called Dead Man's Treasure too. What sets these ghosts apart from the others in the series is the fact that these guys can actually cause damage. They are genuine enemies, which may actually tie into the idea that Big Boss is becoming too engulfed in conflict at this point in the storyline. His role in doling out death in war may be bridging the gap between the worlds of the dead and the living in that sense, causing these ghosts to do real tangible harm to him as he starts to cross a threshold that he can't easily turn back from. Of course, killing is almost always a choice, even for Big Boss, and you have a chance to exorcise ghosts by saving the dying soldiers and reuniting body body and soul. Don't ask me why the ghosts are there when these guys aren't even dead yet. All of this is incredibly cool though, and just like Peace Walker revolutionized what a Metal Gear game could be, it also changes the game when it comes to the ghosts. But by far the coolest little addition of the ghosts in this game is the ambience they come with. You get this haunting track in the background as you explore these dead, empty, dark areas. And if you try to use the radio near a ghost, you'll get interference and won't be able to get a clear message through.
Come in. Do you copy? Be careful.
And on Dead Man's Treasure, sometimes you'll get mysterious calls from an unknown frequency. I wouldn't necessarily call many of the ghost sightings in these games scary or unnerving, but Peace Walker's inclusion of them really does try to set them up as more of a distinctly spooky entity, which is very cool. It's especially good because Peace Walker is a pretty chill game for the most part that knows how to have its fair share of fun with Puyan, cardboard box tanks, and a certain whimsical charm in its presentation. So to see things get a little tense is just what it needs. This entire video I have talked about the real, tangible presence of ghosts in Metal Gear, but nothing else in the series is quite as saturated when it comes to the concept of ghosts as MGSV. We've got spirits reformed into fire demons, phantoms that think they are big lad, and themes based entirely around the concept of a phantom pain that won't ever go away. The whole concept that the phantom pain bases itself around is the idea of loss and being unable to get back what was taken, stuck in a loop of overwhelming pain that circles in on itself again and again. But alongside that is Venom Snake's identity. Part of the pain that Venom has to deal with in the Phantom Pain is the loss of self he suffers since being molded into the Phantom of Big Boss, Naked Snake's shadow, his ghost. While ghosts in the other games have been fun Easter eggs, goofy inclusions with some serious ideas floating around in the background, sometimes literally, or even scarier entities warping the nature of their environment, the Phantom Pain approaches the idea in a way that's far more haunting than the others. It's because Venom's dissociation feels real, tangible, and it's a reflection of us too, of our role in the games, our union with Big Boss, where we fulfill his role in every sense of the word, but are doomed to be nothing but his scapegoat in the end. Venom's role in the Phantom Pain can be interpreted in a lot of ways, and I won't try and dig into all of that for this video, but it is stuff that I think is worth thinking about in regards to how Metal Gear treats the concepts of ghosts in so many unique and funny ways. And I suppose there is a sort of twisted, sort of dark comedy to the real Big Boss manufacturing a phantom of himself while he goes off and prepares the real project of Outer Heaven. I also do not want to forget about the ghost that arguably matters the most in this whole storyline. And just like the other ghosts in the series, this is one that is entirely missable if you don't know where to look. Once you complete the side ops where you extract the former Mother Base soldiers, you'll also acquire photos from the good old days. Then, when you go back to the medical platform and enter the room on the upper floor, you'll be reunited with Paz, but a version of her that is distorted and doesn't make much sense at all. After all, we saw her get blown up at the end of Ground Zeroes. This version of Paz is nothing but a phantom dreamt up by Venom, and it's assumedly a reflection of his guilt that he was unable to save her during those critical moments. It's a fantasy where his greatest failure as Big Boss's right-hand man was revealed to be his greatest triumph. It speaks to something that we see bits and pieces of from Venom elsewhere in the game, which is a deep sense of regret and sadness. Big Boss is supposed to be this legendary mercenary, this hero that everyone can look up to lead them into victory and to live free as the soldiers they're meant to be. But Venom's experience of this legend is far from anything that resembles that fiction. Even as a nearly perfect shadow of Big Boss, Venom still can't live up to the mimetic heroism that he stands for, which in turn turn causes Venom to cook up this fantasy to maybe help himself through the pain. And if Venom Snake really is meant to blur the lines between player and character, then maybe it reflects our sadness of being unable to save Paz too. Paz's story in The Phantom Pain is capped off with a final tape from her that Venom once again cooks up in his mind. This final tape nearly perfectly caps off The Phantom Pain's core ideas, wrapping things up in a way that only an angel of peace could.
You have figured it out now. You can kill Skullface, murder Huey, slaughter Zero, burn the whole world down, and it still won't bring me back. Me, or any of the dead. And that was our business. War. We bought our daily bread with money paid to us for killing. Maybe us getting killed was just balancing the scales. You know, Mother Base was never the heaven we wanted it to be, but I was still happy to have lived with everyone there. It was such a short time, such a hypocritical peace. But while I was on Mother Base, I was happy. So, I hope I am not the only one who looks back on those days with happiness. There is more to remember than hatred and rage. But of course, this is you thinking that I should think that. It is no mystery now. I am just a phantom, a fragment of the mind you have lost. The real me died a long time ago. But even so, more so, I can tell what you are really feeling. The real emotion that is locked away at the bottom of your heart. Let it fly out. Let it guide you. Live. I think it is my job to tell you that. That is why I exist. So this tape is the last one. Once you are done listening to it, I am one phantom limb that will be gone for good. My flesh, my bones, joining the silt on the ocean floor. But do not forget, as long as you remember me, I will always live within you. Not a phantom limb or a phantom anything, as part of your heart. I will always be your angel of peace. So I know exactly how to finish. Say